Welcome to Hangar 51 Files, where history's secrets, classified operations, and hidden truths come to light. From Cold War black ops to the future of warfare, from lost artifacts to emerging defense technologies, we investigate the stories buried beneath official narratives. No speculation, no clickbait, just hard-hitting research, expert analysis, and the pursuit of truth. You're now inside the briefing room. Stay sharp, stay curious. This is Hangar 51 Files.
So you're listening because you want to get a real handle on how the world ticks.
Yeah.
Especially those big, complex, global forces.
Yeah. The ones really shaping things.
Exactly. And today, we're really cutting through the noise to take a deep dive into one of the major players, China.
A huge topic, definitely.
Absolutely. We've pulled together a whole range of sources, reports on their international influence ops, analysis of how they're using AI, even comparisons with, old Soviet tactics, and a look at their media engagement.
It's quite a mixed material.
It is. And our mission here is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Give you the essential takeaways, China's strategies, who they're targeting, what it all means for everyone else.
Without getting totally swamped in information.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Just the crucial stuff. Okay, so let's start unpacking this. There's one thing that seems really central to their whole approach.
Right. I think what jumps out immediately when you look at China's global influence is just the scale of it and how integrated everything is.
Integrated. How so?
Well, it's not just, random initiatives here and there. It feels like a deeply coordinated system. It operates across political, economic, informational spheres all at once.
Okay, a coordinated system.
And a key piece of understanding that system is something called the United Front Work Department, the UFWD.
The UFWD. Okay, that sounds official, maybe a bit obscure for some listeners.
Yeah.
What exactly does it do?
Well, you can think of the UFWD as maybe the CCP's main engine for building and managing influence, both inside China and, crucially, outside.
Building influence.
Yeah, their main focus is on what they call United Front work, which basically is about bringing different groups, different people together to support the party's agenda.
Okay, so who are they targeting with this?
It's pretty broad. The Chinese diaspora is a big one. Also, people in Taiwan, Hong Kong, ethnic minorities within China, religious groups. So you see, the strategy isn't just about projecting a positive image. It's more active. It's about cultivating this global network of people, of actors, who kind of align with Beijing's interests.
Even if they live in countries that might be seen as rivals.
Especially then, potentially. It's about creating allies, or at least softening opposition wherever they can.
Right. So how does that actually, work on the ground? How is it structured?
It's very extensive. The UFWD operates right from the top, the central party level, but it goes all the way down to local committees.
Local committees.
Yeah, and these local branches, they oversee a whole bunch of different organizations. Some look sort of governmental, others seem like regular NGOs or civil society groups.
But they're all pushing the same agenda.
Essentially, yes. Promoting the party state's line in other countries. And we even know UFWD personnel work inside Chinese embassies and consulates.
Ah, so that gives them a direct channel for international stuff.
Exactly. A direct pathway.
And it's clearly not just about friendly tea ceremonies and cultural exchanges. One source we looked at mentioned a pretty alarming situation in New York.
Yes, that was quite something. The FBI charges back in 2023 about an illegal, quote, police station right in Manhattan.
An illegal police station?
Yeah, not like your local precinct. It was allegedly linked to a provincial branch of China's Ministry of Public Security. And crucially, a UFWD official had apparently introduced one of the people involved.
Wow. And what were they accused of doing?
The allegations were serious. Monitoring, even intimidating Chinese nationals living in the U.S., in some cases apparently pressuring them to go back to China.
It's really crossing a line. It shows how far the UFWD's reach can go right into another country's affairs.
It's a very concrete example, yeah. Less diplomacy, more direct action.
So based on what experts are saying, the UFWD's toolkit isn't just persuasion. It's also political maneuvering, intelligence gathering, even trying to get technology.
Exactly right. It really underlines that their approach to influence has many layers. It's not just soft power. There's a harder, more strategic edge to it as well.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about propaganda and how China deals with global media. They seem to be putting a lot of effort into shaping the narrative, the stories told about them worldwide.
Oh, absolutely. A huge amount of effort using a whole range of methods.
Such as?
Well, one is pretty direct.
Yeah.
Diplomatic pressure on foreign journalists and media outlets.
Really? Like complaining officially?
Sometimes more than complaining. We saw examples of like threatening emails sent to journalists in Sweden who'd been critical.
Threatening emails. Wow.
And it's not always public either. There's a lot of private pressure, urging retractions, demanding apologies. It's kind of a constant behind-the-scenes effort to manage the story.
A persistent campaign, almost.
You could call it that. Then you have the more formal stuff, like these content-sharing agreements we're seeing, especially in places like Africa.
Right. Tell me about those.
Well, Xinhua, China's official news agency, has partnerships with big state-run media outlets in Ghana, for example.
So they just share news stories.
Yeah, and things like CGTN, China's global TV network, having regular slots on Kenyan public TV, or China Radio International broadcasting in loads of languages in Kenya.
What's the effect of that, do you think?
Well, the key thing is how it sort of normalizes and subtly legitimizes state-controlled narratives within those local media environments. The audience might not even really think about where the story's coming from or the potential bias.
It just becomes part of the news landscape.
Precisely. And it's not just news. They're also getting into producing and distributing documentaries.
Oh, yes. The Discovery Channel series, China, Time of She, that came up. Sources suggested it was, let's say, a very favorable portrayal.
Quite. And there was that Cambodian documentary praising the CCP's COVID response. Apparently, China's Central Propaganda Department helped broker the deal.
The propaganda department itself.
That's what the reports indicate. So they're using different media formats to project this very specific positive image.
And this ties into education and culture too, right? With the Confucius Institutes.
Definitely. We need to talk about the Ministry of Education and the Confucius Institutes. They build themselves as, language and culture centers.
It sounds harmless enough.
On the surface. But they've faced a lot of criticism, especially in the U.S., about censorship, about promoting Beijing's political lines, pushing their claims on Taiwan, things like that.
Is there evidence for that strategic purpose?
Well, there's a pretty telling quote from a senior Politburo member, Li Chengshun. He described the Confucius Institutes as, and I'm quoting here, an important part of our country's external propaganda layout.
External propaganda layout. That's pretty blunt.
It is. It really highlights their strategic role beyond just teaching Mandarin.
And while we know a lot of these institutes have closed in the U.S. recently.
Yes, there's been a significant pushback.
Our sources also say new partnerships, different kinds of initiatives, are popping up to replace them.
Which suggests it's an ongoing effort, right? They're adapting. They're persistent in trying to shape that global information space.
Absolutely. They seem very adaptable. Okay, now, the digital realm. This is obviously huge today for influencing people. Our sources had some, fascinating and maybe a bit worrying things to say about China and artificial intelligence.
Yeah, the AI aspect is really developing fast. What's particularly striking is just the scale and the sophistication of the AI systems they seem to be using for monitoring and ultimately controlling online talk.
Controlling it? How?
Well, there was that discovery. Hundreds of gigabytes of data found on an unsecured server linked to Baidu, the big Chinese tech firm.
What did that show?
It gave a rare peek inside. It revealed this really complex system for classifying online content. And it clearly prioritized military stuff, social issues, political commentary.
So they're trying to categorize and understand basically everything being said online, at least within their reach.
It looks that way.
Oh.
And, this isn't brand new. Sources pointed back to the rise of microblogging in China years ago, events like the Shaanxi brick kiln incident.
Ah, right, where online discussion really took off and challenged the official story.
Exactly. Those moments probably showed the authorities the power of online platforms to, stir up trouble or question the narrative. And that likely pushed them to develop better monitoring tools.
And now AI takes that to a whole new level.
A completely different level.
Yeah.
Especially with generative AI, the AI that can create new text, images, video.
The stuff everyone's talking about now.
Right. And China is moving fast to regulate it. The Cyberspace Administration of China, the CACIC, is taking the lead. Their draft regulations for generative AI are quite revealing.
Revealing in what way? I saw the bit about AI having to stick to core socialist values.
That certainly stands out, doesn't it? And also, the directive that the data used to train these AI models must ensure truth, accuracy, objectivity, and diversity.
Which sounds incredibly difficult to actually achieve.
Hugely difficult. Think about the sheer amount of biased or just plain wrong information online. The regulations also touch on things like RP rights preventing discrimination.
Yeah.
It shows how complex governing this stuff is.
It really sounds like they're trying to build their political ideology right into the foundations of how AI creates and shares information.
That seems to be the goal, and reports suggest they're not just regulating, they're already using advanced AI models for influence operations.
Like what kind of models?
Well, one called DeepSeek AI came up. Apparently, it operates with filters designed to push pro-Beijing narratives and suppress topics they consider sensitive.
So the AI itself is biased.
Or at least heavily guided. Combine that with coordinated networks of fake accounts online, plus deepfake technology, those super realistic fake videos or images.
Yeah, those are scary.
And you can see how they could flood social media with propaganda that's getting harder and harder for regular people to spot as being state-sponsored.
And big tech companies are seeing this.
Yes, findings from Microsoft, cybersecurity firms, they all point to this trend. AI-generated content being used more and more for manipulation.
So it's not just making propaganda more efficient, it's making it sneakier, more tailored.
Exactly. Potentially more personalized, harder to distinguish from real discussion. It's a much more insidious form of influence.
And we've seen actual campaigns, right, like Dragon Bridge.
Yes, that one aimed at undermining trust in the U.S. democratic process. And other campaigns spreading specific stories around the 2020 election or Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taiwan.
It's a very active and, concerning picture in the digital space.
It really is. It shows AI becoming an absolutely critical tool for state influence campaigns.
Okay, shifting gears slightly again. Our sources also talked about some of the more coercive tactics, even corruption.
Right. This is the sharper end of the influence toolkit, applying pressure, sometimes punishment, to people or outlets that publish unfavorable coverage or take stances Beijing dislikes.
How does that manifest?
It can range from things like online harassment campaigns, cyber attacks against journalists or media sites.
Nasty stuff.
All the way to harassing or even detaining the family members of foreign journalists if those relatives are based in China.
That's intense. It really sends a chilling message.
It's a stark reminder of the risks involved in critical reporting on China.
And then there's the corruption angle, often linked to big economic projects like the Belt and Road Initiative.
Right.
Absolutely. The BRI involves massive infrastructure projects, often in countries that might have, let's say, weaker democratic checks and balances, or less regulatory oversight.
Creating opportunities.
Opportunities for lucrative deals, often benefiting Chinese companies, sometimes with less transparency, maybe not always in the best interest of the host country's public.
And this can lead to elite capture. I saw that term.
Exactly. It's about cultivating relationships with influential figures in other countries, politicians, business leaders, often using financial incentives, direct or indirect, so that these elites start prioritizing Beijing's interests, maybe over their own countries.
So influence through economic leverage and sometimes potentially outright corruption.
It appears to be part of the playbook in some cases.
Now, it's really interesting to compare China's approach to what the Soviets did and what Russia does now. Our sources drew some comparisons and contrasts there.
Yes, it's helpful context. While you see some echoes, China really has carved out its own distinct style.
How so? What did the Soviets focus on?
Well, the classic Soviet KGB active measures were heavily focused on ideology. Undermining capitalism, supporting communist movements, trying to basically defeat the West ideologically.
And Russia today.
Russia continues some of that, co-opting academics, funding think tanks or NGOs, using front groups for propaganda. But they seem to target a broader spectrum now, both left and right politically.
Like that weirdly close relationship between Putin and Henry Kissinger, for instance.
Exactly. It highlights that broader reach, less strictly ideological, perhaps.
And how does China's long-game strategy compare?
Well, a key difference often highlighted is China's strategic patience. That famous phrase, hide and bide. Hide your strength, bide your time.
Compared to the Soviets wanting to win the Cold War more immediately.
Right. The PRC, for a long time, focused its external message on this idea of a peaceful rise, fitting into the existing world order, not overturning it. At least that was the message for many years.
That seems to be changing a bit now, maybe.
It does seem more assertive lately. Another unique thing is how China sometimes uses accusations of racism, isn't it?
Yes, tell me about that.
It's a tactic they sometimes use, framing criticism of the government or its policies as being racially motivated. It can be quite effective in deflecting scrutiny, putting critics on the defensive. And there's also this underlying idea within the CCP that it sort of expects allegiance, or at least deference, from all ethnic Chinese people globally, no matter their citizenship. That plays into their overseas work, too.
Okay, that's a really important nuance.
Uh,
Our sources also gave some very specific examples of influence in action. The whole Disney Mulan thing in Xinjiang that caused a stir.
Oh, definitely. Filming in Xinjiang, where there are widespread reports of human rights abuses against Uyghurs, and then thanking propaganda departments in the credits.
Yeah, that didn't look good.
It really highlighted that tension, didn't it? Hollywood wanting access to that huge Chinese market versus worries about being complicit in, well, covering up abuses or promoting state narratives.
And it's not a one-off, is it? Hollywood self-censorship seems quite common.
It does. To gain and keep access to that incredibly lucrative market, studios have often altered content.
Like in Doctor Strange, changing a character's origin.
Exactly. Or changes in Top Gun, Maverick, removing flags, even altering scenes in films like Berlin, I Love You to satisfy Chinese censors.
It seems the sheer size of the Chinese box office, plus the fact that the Central Propaganda Department oversees film approvals, that gives them immense leverage.
Absolutely huge leverage. It leads to self-censorship where studios proactively remove or change things they think might cause offense in Beijing.
So subtle changes, sometimes bigger ones, all driven by market access.
Pretty much. And the economic consequences if you do upset Beijing can be severe. Look at the NBA.
Ah, the incident with the Houston Rockets GM tweeting support for Hong Kong protesters.
Right. The backlash from China was immediate and massive. Pulled broadcasts, lost sponsorships. It really showed the financial risk involved in criticizing China, even on unrelated issues.
A powerful warning shot to other global businesses.
For sure.
And this isn't just hitting Western companies. We saw a survey from Latin America and the Caribbean.
Yes, looking at opinions among the leaders there.
It showed they perceived China as having a lot of influence overall, especially economically, but views on media influence were more mixed.
Which suggests, maybe, that the economic ties are more obvious, more tangible day to day than the subtler effects of media or propaganda in that region. But it varies.
However, the findings on TikTok were pretty stark. From the Network Contagion Research Institute.
Yes, those were quite concerning. The suggestion that the platform's algorithm might be amplifying pro-China content and suppressing anti-China content.
Even if the anti-China stuff gets more engagement naturally.
That's what the research suggested, yeah. On a platform used so heavily, especially by young people, that raises real questions about how narratives are being shaped.
And they found a correlation between heavy TikTok use and more positive views of China.
They did, which, correlation isn't causation, but it's definitely something that warrants close attention.
Especially combined with worries about all the user data TikTok collects.
Right, that's a whole other layer of national security concerns for many countries.
So let's pull back and look at the big picture. Taking all this together, the United Front, propaganda, AI, coercion, market leverage, what are the broad strategic implications for, say, the U.S. and other democratic nations?
Well, the sources are pretty clear that these activities are seen as a major challenge to national security, for one, by undermining international norms, by potentially interfering with democratic processes through spreading divisive or false information.
Like the allegations of funding political candidates in Canada.
Exactly. That's a very direct kind of interference, if true. It really strikes at the heart of democratic integrity.
And beyond politics.
The independence of other institutions is at risk, too. Media, academia, through that covert manipulation we talked about, or just the pressure leading to self-censorship.
Right, and it's hard to even know the full extent, like with university donations from China-linked sources.
Precisely. There's often a lack of transparency that makes it hard to grasp the full scope of financial influence.
It all seems to fit into that three warfares doctrine we mentioned earlier.
It really does. Legal warfare, using law to advance goals, psychological warfare, influencing perceptions and morale, and media warfare, controlling the narrative. It's a framework for achieving objectives without necessarily resorting to military force.
Winning without fighting, essentially.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And in that context, the concept of information defense becomes really important for countries trying to counter this, being proactive, not just reactive.
And China's use of international organizations. They seem to play that game too.
Oh, definitely. They engage actively, use these platforms to promote their interests, gain legitimacy. But they don't always seem bound by the conventions of those organizations if it clashes with their own goals.
Like with the law of the sea and the South China Sea disputes.
That's a prime example. So using the system, but also bending or ignoring the rules when convenient. Someone used the analogy of an anaconda in the chandelier.
Right, explain that.
The idea is the CCP is like this powerful force, subtly positioning itself overhead, slowly tightening its grip to control the global conversation about China, often without people realizing it until it's too late.
It's a very evocative image. And fundamentally, our sources suggest this all comes down to a clash of values, doesn't it?
Absolutely. A stark contrast between the core principles of open, democratic societies, individual liberty, free speech, rule of law, and China's more authoritarian, party-centric system.
And that contrast needs to be made clear.
Consistently clear, yes. Highlighting those fundamental differences is crucial. Resisting the push to adopt or accept China's more repressive norms.
It seems like their old hide and bide strategy was pretty effective for a long time.
It was very effective. But the current approach, which is much more assertive, sometimes quite aggressive, well, it's often being seen as heavy-handed around the world now.
Which might actually create pushback.
It might. It creates openings for democratic nations to reaffirm their own values and resist that pressure more openly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today in this deep dive. China's incredibly complex, evolving influence operations across so many different areas.
It's a huge interconnected picture.
Yeah, just to recap a few key things. The strategic role of the United Front in building that global network, the sophisticated and layered approach to propaganda and media control, the really fast-growing role of AI in shaping what people see and believe, and just the major geopolitical implications of all this.
Definitely. It's a comprehensive, strategically driven effort, and the consequences are potentially very far-reaching.
Right. And that really brings us to our final thought for you, the listener, today. Thinking about how interconnected our global information systems are now, and how sophisticated states are getting at trying to shape how we see the world. What responsibility do you think we have? As individuals, maybe as part of institutions, how responsible are we for really digging into the sources of our information, for critically looking at the stories being pushed?
That's a really crucial question for everyone navigating today's world.
It is. Something we hope you'll reflect on further. It's a vital topic. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.
That's it for this episode of Hangar 51 Files, where we uncover the hidden, investigate the unexplained, and challenge the official story. If you found this episode insightful, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with those who refuse to accept surface-level narratives. For more deep dives, exclusive research, and behind-the-scenes content, visit www.hangar51files.com, our YouTube channel, at Hangar 51 Files, or our Substack, hangar51files.substack.com. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and keep questioning everything. This is Hangar 51 Files, signing off. No speculation, no clickbait, just hard-hitting research, expert analysis, and the pursuit of truth.